this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
You know how it's never really about where you're going, it's about who you're going with? The right people can turn any drive into a great memory. That's something Toyota really believes. They design vehicles around real life and real people, the ones who make plans happen and bring everyone together. Inside, everything's built with passengers in mind. Comfortable seating, smart layouts, and space that actually works so everyone can relax and enjoy the ride. There's room for the people, room for the stuff, and room for the moments that happen along the way. Because when people are the destination, your ride is important. Learn more at Toyota.com and find the vehicle that fits your people.
Amazon presents Jamal versus the Shih Tzu. Descending from the gray wolf, Shih Tzus live by their own untamed primal code of not giving a single Shih Tzu. But Jamal shopped on Amazon and bought dog treats, chew toys, and 32 ounces of carpet cleaner. Hey Jamal, you've been promoted to pack leader. Save the everyday with Amazon.
This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 1102 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Some of you may have heard about it already, but Late Round Fantasy Football has a brand new website. We're shifting off of Patreon, and we've now got a members hub for all Late Round members, where you can get rankings, data dumps, Discord access, and more. And the site itself has more information too. Prices aren't changing, but if you're a patron and you want access to the new site, you should have received some communication via email already. If you haven't, you want to make the switch, email david@lateround.com and David Kitchen can help you out. There's going to be a transition period here, so bear with us, but the new website is seriously awesome. And on that site, you can now officially pre-order the Late Round Draft Guide. That guide is going to give you everything you need to crush your season-long drafts this year. There's game theory discussion, player analysis, targets and avoids, rankings, and more. You can check that out on the new lateround.com site right now. That's lateround.com. The first question this week is from Kobe on Patreon. It says, "Hey JJ, are there any big picture dynasty strategies that you consistently live by to keep a roster healthy and competitive long term? For example, in a start 3 wide receiver PPR league, would you generally lean toward elite wide receivers like Chase, Puka, and JSN over elite running backs like Gibbs and Bijan if they're in the same tier because of the longevity and roster building advantage? And in the deep late rounds of a startup, are high upside players who may never pan out better stashes than handcuff running backs and sacrificial X wide receivers that we don't expect to hold much standalone fantasy value?" So I don't have one singular answer here because every roster needs to be approached differently. Like if I'm in win now mode, I might hold on to less of those project wide receivers who need some time to develop. I'll opt for backup third string running backs. It all depends on where my roster's at. And I don't think there's some clear-cut answer with whether you go with Chase or Puka or JSN versus Bijan and Gibbs. I can tell you that I tend to build with wide receiver and non-running backs and usually address running back last. And I do that for 2 reasons. First, if I have a higher end rookie draft pick, I can get more of that immediate production at running back in a lot of classes, like Jeremiah Love this year. But even last year, we had a handful of year 1 impact type players at running back. But then second, if I'm competitive or borderline competitive, my biggest need is at running back. It's a position that teams are typically more willing to part with mid-season. Non-competitive teams. Because players like Derrick Henry, they're at the tail end of their career, and managers know that. If they're not competitive, they'll want to cash in before being the ones holding the bag. From just a perception standpoint, it's not quite the same at wide receiver. The overarching approach and philosophy that I have with Dynasty is to draft for value and trade for need. I'm rarely jumping tiers for need in rookie drafts early on in rookie drafts, unless it's a league that doesn't have a lot of trading. But in an active league where I know that I can get a deal done, I won't reach for a need. I want to first accumulate that value. And then I can address it later. And when I address it later, I have a larger player pool to choose from, not just rookies. It makes doing a deal easier because I have more options. Hopefully that answers your question though. I think the beauty of Dynasty is that every league has different dynamics, and every league is going to force you to have somewhat of a different approach. The best players, in my opinion, they're the ones who are able to adapt to that specific league environment. Now, speaking of adapting to your league's environment, the next one is an email from Corey. It says, "Hi, why are quarterbacks generally prioritized so heavily in Superflex leagues? I draft primarily on replacement values, and for a 10-man league, so replacement starter is the 20th ranked quarterback, those values say that only Josh Allen should go in round 1. Most Superflex mocks and rankings have 5 or more quarterbacks in round 1. So if I'm being totally honest, I cannot stand Superflex rankings. I despise them. Because if you're not reading the draft room, reading your individual league's draft, if you're not doing that in a Superflex league, you're doing it totally wrong. And rankings can't account for that. In some leagues, you're going to get 8 quarterbacks drafted in round 1. And unfortunately, the position will dry up. You mentioned using a simple VORP equation where your baseline quarterback is the QB 20. Some leagues, that's not the baseline quarterback because some teams are going to draft 3 quarterbacks before you're even thinking about your second one. And obviously the league size matters here too. League size is generally 12, not 10. They get prioritized so heavily in Superflex leagues because obviously the supply and demand equation just shifts. Instead of starting 1, you're generally starting 2. Now, you could argue that it matters a little bit less in full PPR formats because some elite wide receivers can match those quarterback scores. But quarterback is generally going to score more points than the other positions. And there are at most 32 of them. There's 32 starters. And at this moment, we don't even know who some of those starters even are. Which means the supply can run out quickly in leagues where teams aren't afraid to just start their drafts with like 2 quarterbacks. Or where they get 2 in the first 3 rounds. I do think that VORP has flaws, just inherently. I talk about that a lot every year in the late round draft guide. But even if you go with VORP, you still need to account for where that baseline player gets drafted. If he goes in round 4, let's say, then it's not an apples to apples comparison if the baseline player at a different position goes in round 8. If the baseline player at wide receiver, let's say, goes in round 8, that's different than the baseline player going in round 4 at quarterback. Because that point differential from that player to the baseline player, it's stretching across fewer rounds at quarterback in that case, which means there's a higher opportunity cost if you pass on that position. But look, I think your overall feelings towards rankings in Superflex is very valid because even myself, as someone who does Superflex rankings, I hate them. It's different in Dynasty because there's a market component that we have to worry about long term. But in redraft, you need to read the room first and foremost. This last question is from Dylan. It says, who are some of your favorite underrated tight ends in Dynasty right now? Any interesting finds with a new tight end model, or was that just for prospects? Well, that model is for prospects, yes. And if you go past like even the 2025 class, you're getting into tight ends where we now have multiple NFL seasons from them. So a prospect score is just not as relevant. But if we look at last year's class, the model reinforces the idea that Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren and Harold Fannin are all really good. And I'm still holding out hope for Terrence Ferguson. I had him as a buy this offseason, and even though they drafted Max Clare, Ferguson's an athletic tight end who scored well in both the old model and this new model. And we know the Rams are going to run heavy personnel, and I'm expecting Ferguson to take a step forward. According to Keep Trade Cut, he's at a very reasonable price tag of tight end 22. Another tight end you might want to look at is Greg Dulcich. He's tight end 42 on Keep Trade Cut. He's probably on the waiver wire in a lot of your dynasty leagues. One of the things to always look for in a breakout tight end is an obvious lack of pass catchers on that team. And Miami clearly has that. Dulcich is also coming off a season where he was targeted on almost 23% of his routes run, and he had a crazy good 2.31 yards per route run rate on 145 routes run. That's according to PFF. Now look, that's not a ton of routes run, so these numbers aren't amazingly predictive. But when we're talking about a totally free player in a situation without pass catching alternatives, I do think that we can use some of those numbers to just say, hey, let's throw a dart at this player. I've also taken him plenty in best ball drafts so far. Some other players who I think are worth dart throws are Juwan Johnson, who's coming off his most efficient season by most metrics. Pat Freiermuth still isn't 28 years old. He could have a larger role in this new offense. And Michael Mayer. The Raiders are probably going to run a lot more 12 personnel. I've talked about that this offseason. And Mayer has injury upside if something happens to Brock Bowers. So those are some random names that make sense to me right now. This next question is an email from Robert. It says, "Hey JJ, love all the work you do. Thanks. Thank you. Are we ignoring LaQuint Allen in Jacksonville? Everybody's talking about Bashaw Tutin's breakout, but isn't getting on the field the first goal of a successful running back? Allen has already proven his pass protection and work in the passing game. What are the chances he gets the lion's share of work? Thanks, Bob." I mean, to be fair, they played almost an identical number of snaps per game last year, Bashaw Tutin and LaQuint Allen. They just did very, very different things. Allen would run a few more routes per game. Tutin would see a handful of more rushes. Allen only had a little over 1 rush attempt per game last year. He played their third down role. According to Fantasy Life data, 79% of their long down and distance snaps last year went to LaQuint Allen. Travis Etienne and Bashaw Tutin combined for the final 21%. Now, Allen was a great pass catcher in college, and that translated to a role right away in the NFL. The problem is that he likely isn't the player that they're going to want to use on early downs. I mean, last season, Allen had 6 total first half rush attempts. He had 17 in the second half, and about half of his attempts came on 3rd and 4th down. The reason Tutin's getting love right now, or even Chris Rodriguez, is because Travis Etienne, who was the most valuable asset in that backfield last year, he's gone. And the idea is that someone's going to be taking that work. And since Allen played a very specific role last season, and this is the same coaching staff, there's more upside for that role to be absorbed by Tutin than LaQuint Allen. Now, with that being said, I've thrown plenty of final round dart throws in best ball at LaQuint Allen. He'll likely have a role on that team. It's just that when we aim for pass catchers in fantasy, we don't only want guys who are mostly playing on 3rd down, and who probably won't be seeing much goal line work, if any. The likely outcome is that Allen more so caps the ceiling of a player like Bashaw Tutin or Chris Rodriguez, as opposed to having crazy standalone value himself. But in best ball, I think given that he has some role, and he's so cheap, and there's at least some chance for a little bit more work, he could give us some usable weeks here and there on a full PPR platform like DraftKings. This next question is from Twitter. It's from @BNLBRGHT31. I'm sure that spells something, but I have no idea what it spells. What's your outlook on Matthew Stafford this year? Seems like a clear regression candidate based on touchdown rate, but Rams throw at a much higher rate close to the goal line. I mean, look, to be fair, the Rams were still just 11th last year in pass rate within the 10-yard line. And in 2024, the year before Devontae Adams, they were 17th. And Matthew Stafford had a 3.9% touchdown rate one year and then a 7.7% touchdown rate the next year. But look, Stafford undoubtedly had a crazy high expected touchdowns number because they also threw it a lot at the goal line, at the actual goal line. His expected touchdowns last year were closer to 42 or 43. That's insanity. He threw 46, so he outperformed that mark, but it's not like he outperformed it by such a crazy, crazy number. Now, I've seen this a lot in fantasy analysis. People often think that if a player didn't far outperform his expected numbers from the previous season, whether it be yards, touchdowns, whatever, that automatically means that he's not a regression candidate. But that's not exactly how this works. Like, we can't just assume that Stafford is going to have 42 expected touchdown passes again. The year prior, he was at 28. That number fluctuates and it changes. It's just helpful when we're looking at a player and we're saying, if he maintains this type of workload, will things get better or will things get worse? That's what the expected numbers can help us do and find out. And for Stafford, it would be a little bit worse probably, but we also shouldn't expect him to maintain that kind of workload because it's not a common number to hit at all. It's a very, very high expected touchdowns mark. And we also know that touchdown rate is a number that regresses to the mean. I'll likely have another rewind episode on this topic coming up, but touchdown rate has a negative relationship to current season production among quarterbacks in fantasy football. As in, when you're looking at a draft-worthy quarterback, the ones with higher touchdown rates in the previous season actually underperform versus expectation at a higher rate than the players who have lower touchdown rates. And that's because fantasy managers, they look at the previous season and they look at those numbers and they say, oh yeah, I'll draft Matthew Stafford really high because he had 46 touchdowns last year. That raises the player's cost and it makes it harder for those guys to really exceed expectation because touchdown rate regresses. So we'll see where Stafford ends up landing ADP-wise. I don't usually have strong quarterback takes in best ball because I'm usually just stacking. But I don't have a serious problem with his QB 15 ADP over on Fantasy Pros. Now, it might sound crazy, but I think someone like Tyler Shuck, Kyler Murray, they might have more intriguing upside because they're rushing. And Malik Willis even. Because if you draft them in season long and they don't pan out, you can just start streaming and still be okay. It's crazy. I understand that it's crazy to say that because Stafford is just so good. But we have to play this game of fantasy football. That's what the game is. Whether fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to view it, mobility at the quarterback position matters so much. I do expect regression from Stafford this year, though. We can't project anyone to hit 40 passing touchdowns, let alone repeating 46. The last question this week is from @BrainyBallers. It says, it would be awesome hearing about your early years in the industry and what helped shape the legend we all know today. I've heard you talk about your background a couple of times in your podcast, but I'd love to hear more about your inspirations and what helped shape late round QB in its early years. So first off, I'm far from a legend. I'm just a guy in mom's basement doing fantasy content. But this type of question has now been asked multiple times over the last couple of mailbag cycles, and it's the off season, less stuff is going on, so I'll talk about it. And I'll bookmark this for any future questions like it because I know that I tell this story periodically. But I'll just do it one more time. And if this kind of thing does not interest you, thanks for listening. I appreciate you. Have a great weekend. I'll catch you next week. Anyway, where this all started, I graduated college in 2010, I got my degree in marketing, and I had a background in graphic and web design. Back then, you couldn't vibe code. I just learned front-end development and design while I was in high school. I started building websites when I was like in 8th or 9th grade. I actually thought I was going to go to school for design at one point. So out of college, my now wife got a job in Cincinnati, Ohio, and that's where I moved. And I got a job at an ad agency, and I hated it. I loved the people, I loved the atmosphere, but I just didn't like the job. I was a project manager. I thought I was going to bring all my skill sets together and be really good at that job. And I think I was good at that job for what it's worth, but it just felt like admin work. I took one other job at a different agency where it was smaller, and I did some more hands-on design, some more hands-on website development work. But while I was at my first job, I knew I couldn't do that for the next 40 plus years. I knew I needed to do something about it. So I sat down one day, I wrote my passions down in a Word document, and I couldn't get off the fantasy football idea. At the time, there wasn't nearly as much content as what we see today. It was the big players, the big media sites mostly. And at that time, which was late in the 2011 season, I couldn't help but notice how every analyst was essentially telling people to draft quarterbacks early next year, or that you needed a good quarterback to win in fantasy. But I knew through playing for a decade at that point, because I started playing in like 2001, 2002, I knew that the logic didn't make sense. Yes, quarterback numbers were really good in 2011, but it wasn't like we predictably knew exactly which quarterbacks would be good. And we also knew supply and demand was a big part of this game. And that position just didn't matter that much from a supply and demand perspective. So I decided to blend all of my passions together on a project outside of work. At that time, ebooks really weren't that easy to produce and they weren't that popular. But I knew how to design, I knew how to code, so I could write the ebook, I could design the charts, I could make it look decent, and then I could code it so it was responsive on different devices. So that's what I did. Each day I'd go to work, I'd go home, and then I'd write. I had very little responsibilities at the time because I was 23 years old. I then did that for about 6 months, and I published the late round quarterback ebook in June of 2012. And then in 2012, a lot of stuff that I wrote about ended up coming true. Quarterbacks regressed, we had more chaos at the position, and late round quarterback dominated. That got me a guest series on RotoWorld after having a call with Evan Silva, who funny enough is a friend of mine now. And then I actually wrote a few articles on PFF when Mike Clay was running things there. Almost exactly a year after my book launched, I got a full-time job offer from Nick Bonadio at Numberfire. I was asked to create content for them, which turned into me essentially building out the media business for Numberfire. I would recruit writers, they'd write content, I'd edit the content, I'd critique things for the writers. We were a well-oiled machine. We were doing up to 30 articles per day at one point. Some really awesome analysts actually got their start under me at Numberfire. Scott Barrett and Graham Barfield over at Fantasy Points, Jacob Gibbs at CBS Sports, Chris Raybon and Action Network. There are tons more. Apologies if I didn't name you, but I'm proud of what we built, without a doubt. We then were bought by FanDuel in 2015. I became a FanDuel employee. The first couple of years, they were actually kind of rough just from the perspective that FanDuel didn't know what they wanted to do with us. But my team, alongside my boss, Adam Kaplan, who was there with me back at Numberfire, We all just started kind of taking over as thought leaders within that organization and with digital content. So I was at FanDuel for almost 7 years, and I did some cool stuff there. I got to do TV spots. I got to have a real budget to work with. I really did enjoy my time at FanDuel. I have nothing but good things to say about that company and the people that I worked with. It just got to a point where I always had this goal in mind to run my own company. Just going back to the start, I taught myself how to design and build websites. That was what I did in high school to make money. I didn't have the traditional jobs. That's what got me decent internships in college. I've just always had this desire to create. And the only way that I could really do that completely freely was to go out on my own and start a business. So in January 2022, that's what I did. I left FanDuel and I started Late Round Fantasy Football. My plan was to actually never hire anyone and just do my own thing. But then David Kitchen became available, and he was something I actually had thought of when I started the business as someone who could help manage sort of like the business side of things. So I hired him last year, January 2025, and then I was able to add Brandon Gadula in January of this year. And look, right now, I really don't have plans to be much bigger from a human resource standpoint. I would be totally content and fine if it's just us three forever. Because I want to be able to stay true to what I really want to do, which is create content and analyze this game. The bigger you get, the more managing that you have to do. And if that's the case, then I would have less time focusing on the content. But look, in the end, if you want to talk about inspiration and what pushed me to do this, I just couldn't do the typical 9-to-5 thing. I didn't like it. I knew I didn't like it. I knew I needed out. I was determined to do whatever I could to not do that. Because I know myself. I know that if I had that standard job that I just didn't like doing, it would affect my mental health, it would affect my relationships, and that's not a good thing at all. And I am fully aware of how lucky I am. Look, I know that I worked hard. I know I was able to think about things in a way that other people weren't thinking. I was able to market an idea in a way that was unique. And that's something I'm very proud of. Don't get me wrong. But anytime you're able to find success doing something, you have to take a step back and you have to try to be objective, you know? For me, I was lucky to have an interest in an industry that was just starting to boom. I was lucky to have a loose connection to even have an interview at Numberfire. I was lucky that my content ended up getting seen by the right people at the right time. And there have been ups and downs through all of this, trust me. Most of the really tough stuff happened pretty early on where I was working like 14, 15 hours a day pretty consistently. There were definitely times in that like 2013 to 2016 timeframe where I let my work like get in the way of health. Fortunately though, I've always had a great support system with my wife, my family, my friends, and I've always been able to bounce back. I think that's key with anything that you set out to do. Don't do it alone. Lean on people, ask for advice, be willing to feel what you need to feel. Don't let it just sit there. But really what inspired me to do all this was just this desire to create something that could connect people and get them to think differently about a game that I really do deeply love. As I've gotten older, I've realized that critical thinking is something to just not take for granted. It's important to always work your mind. And this game is a way for us to do that. That's one of the many reasons I love doing what I do. I get to go in the lab, I get to completely fry my brain researching things, and then I emerge with some new idea that you guys can judge me on. It's legitimately really, really fun. And it's one of the things that drives me to keep innovating and coming up with new ideas. Now, look, there are plenty of details in there that I could have gotten to. I could have talked about this for hours. And if any of you want to learn more or you just want to bounce an idea off of me, you can always email me. But that's really the story. From a lazy high school student who just built websites, hung out with friends, played some sports, to an advertising project manager, to an editor-in-chief, to an entrepreneur. That's how Late Round Fantasy Football came to be. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you yet subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Thanks for listening this week, everyone. I greatly appreciate it. Make sure you check out lateround.com. Sign up for whatever you can sign up for or whatever you want to sign up for. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks for the continued support. Enjoy your weekend. I'll catch you next week.
This is Sophia Donner from OK Storytime. This summer, find your next obsession on Prime Video. And listen, we're not saying you need another obsession, but there could be a lot worse ones. Steamy romance, addictive love stories, and the book-to-screen favorites you've already read twice, so why not watch them a third time? Off Campus, Elle, The Love Hypothesis, and more. Slow burns, second chances, chemistry you can feel through the screen, and it makes you wish you were actually in that movie. We've got binge-worthy series, can't miss movies, perfect for when you're ignoring your own problems or procrastinating, as one does. Your next obsession is waiting. Watch only on Prime.
When you manage procurement for multiple facilities, every order matters. But when it's for a hospital system, they matter even more. Grainger gets it and knows there's no time for managing multiple suppliers and no room for shipping delays. That's why Grainger offers millions of products in fast, dependable delivery, so you can keep your facility stocked, safe, and running smoothly. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.